Today we're going to be talking about a sun goddess from the Khasi religion. So the Khasi people live in northeastern India, and the interesting thing about them is they're a matrilineal society. So both the property and the inheritance in families are passed down through the female line, not what usually would be is the male line. You'll find that the significant population of the Khasi people usually reside in India or also in Bangladesh. We have two regions that have a lot of Khasi people. Also, India has recognized the Khasi as a scheduled tribe. Today we're only going to be talking about one goddess. Her name is Sngi. She is the goddess of the sun, or actually the sun. So let me tell you some of her stories. Today we have 4 tales to share about the sun goddess Sngi. So the first one is called What Caused the Shadows on the Moon. So in the early ages, there was a family of deities, and that consisted of a mother, 3 daughters, and 1 son. They lived really happily for a long time. Their names were Ka'um, which is the water, Kading, fire, Sngi, the sun, and the boy was called Ubnai, the moon. They were all very beautiful and very vital, but everybody agreed that Sngi and Ubnai, the brother and the sister, the youngest of course, possessed greater beauty and loveliness more than the 2 elder sisters, which is a little sad, but hey, everybody's still beautiful. They just are a little more beautiful. So in those days, the moon was equal to the sun in brightness and splendor. When Ubnai grew up, he began to become a bit of a troublemaker. He would disappear for days at a time, wouldn't let anybody know. He became really selfish, very self-indulgent. He felt that he was entitled to more than the women folk allowed him. He abandoned himself to a life of pleasure and wild pursuits, paying no heed to the advice and warnings of the elders, to the point where he was actually hanging out with a bunch of miscreants. He would hang out in a place of darkness that was a land of goblins and vice. After being in this place, he started to miss home. It's pretty dark and lonely there. So he ended up leaving his evil companions to return back to his sisters and his mother. Because he was living in a life full of darkness, surrounded by gross, grisly people and creatures, his sister, Sngi, dazzled with beauty. She greeted him with smiles of joy when he returned. Instead of greeting her like a brother, he went straight to his mom, and he was like, I need to marry my sister. So this was actually his argument, and I'm sure some of us have actually heard this before. I've seen the world, and there's no one but me who is equivalent to her beauty. Therefore, it makes sense that I am a match for Sngi. So not only that, but he also says to his mother, it's your responsibility and, of course, most suitable that we marry. Nobody else. Us 2 forever. The mom was incredibly dismayed and dismissed her gross son. Sngi heard about this and became incredibly enraged because of this unchaste proposal. Sngi hunted her brother down. When she did find him, she threw hot ashes into Ubnai's face. This scorched his flesh so deeply, those marks remain on his face today. That's why the moon has dark shadows on his face, and why he doesn't come out during the day. Because he's avoiding Sngi. So now we have another story. It's called How the Peacock Got His Feathers. When the world was young, all the animals spoke the same language. We all spoke the same. So the peacock, Uklu, was just an ordinary bird. But because he was a peacock and he had really long feathers and he kind of carried himself with grace, it really got to his head. He became an incredible, arrogant asshole. And his neighbors genuinely disliked him, so much so that they wanted to play a trick on him. So they decided to flatter him and be like, oh, you're so beautiful and so great. You know, you should be the ambassador of the jungle birds and you should carry greetings to the most beautiful sun maiden, Sngi. And what she would do is pour her bright sunshine upon the world. And this is a great, wonderful thing. So Euclude's like, of course I should. That's a brilliant idea, you guys. Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad he thinks so highly of me. But he also says to them, I'm going to win the heart of Khasi, and I'm just going to live in her beautiful blue realm and ditch you guys. So the other birds thought that this whole thing was hysterical. They didn't let him know, but mostly they just thought he wouldn't be able to fly this far. He's a peacock, so he probably can't. But he actually does. He makes this journey. He soars so high and he reaches the sky and the palace of Khasi, who's the most beautiful of maidens and also the most good. So Khasi was destined to live alone in her grand palace, and her heart yearned for companionship. She was alone for all of this time, giving so much. So here comes Euclude, who's like, hey man, I'm the ambassador, but I'm also here for you. And Khasi is more than happy to take him. She waits on Euclude hand and foot and was totally and completely devoted to him and his happiness. And after a while, Euclude becomes cold and indifferent to her grand gestures. I mean, she's the goddess of the sun. So Sngi used to shed her warm rays on the earth. But because Euclude is taking up all of her attention after all this time, the earth does become miserable, it becomes cold. All of the elements begin to destroy the environment around them in the jungle, but also the birds. So, of course, the birds have had enough of this. They decide to reach out to mankind because they are the wisest of all creatures and they want advice. They know it's Euclude's fault, but how to lure him back from the most beautiful woman in the world. But they also miss their goddess. They miss seeing her smile every morning. So mankind actually suggests working with a woman whose name is Khasi. At this time, she's kind of destitute because of a previous famine, but she's really happy that the birds have come to ask for aid. She said she would help lure this peacock back into the jungle, but only on two conditions. The first one being the birds have to stop picking seeds from her garden. The other is to shoo away other animals who come and eat her crops or trample her land. The birds are like, okay, sure, that's super easy. So the birds were really apprehensive because the woman would just constantly tend to her garden. This is from dusk until dawn and for days. She's just manicuring this garden. Not only that, but she shaped her mustard bed into the form of a woman. The birds just did as they were told, but they're still confused about the entire thing, even though her garden is doing pretty effing well. In time, small yellow flowers appeared on all the mustard plants, so that the plot of land actually looked like a beautiful maiden wearing a mantle of gold. And even the neighbors, all the birds, they recognized its beauty, but they really genuinely had no idea what she was doing. Let's go back to the blue realm. Euclude has become increasingly worse, as spoiled brats do. Nothing was good enough. He was difficult to please. The Sun Palace itself became shrouded in darkness. Euclude's mind wandered around at the time in life that he previously had before the Blue Palace. He kind of missed his neighbors. So one day he decided to just look down from the palace. This is how spoiled he is. He hadn't even looked down all this time. So immediately he was drawn to what he thought was a lovely maiden dressed all in gold, lying asleep in a garden in the middle of the forest where he himself had once lived. So at the sight of her, his heart melted and he just forgot entirely about his amazing sun goddess, Khasi. He really wanted this girl now. So he tells Khasi, sorry, but found somebody else. Bye! And leaving Khasi totally devastated. She felt forsaken by her husband, and he clearly is like a heartless asshole, incredibly selfish. So he went away. He was starting to fly back down, and Khasi followed him, weeping. As she wept, her tears bedewed his feathers, and that transformed them into the colors of the rainbow. Some large drops falling on his long tail as he flew away were turned into brilliant hued spots. These are actually called Umat Khasi, or the sun's tears, by the Khasi people today. So the peacock came back to the jungle. The birds greeted him. He told them that he had returned because there's this lovely maiden dressed in gold. To this, the birds kind of laughed, because they finally realized what that woman in the garden was actually doing all this time, making her mustard garden look like a golden woman to lure him down. So the birds invited Uklu to come meet this mysterious mistress. They even provide a giant ceremony in the garden. They are celebrating, and they lead him to the garden, to the woman. And that's when it's revealed it was just a garden, and he had imagined this beautiful maiden. So the neighbors, of course, are laughing, and Uklu feels ashamed and humiliated, and he has the audacity to try to go back to the blue realm. But he can no longer fly, so he had to continue to live in the jungle forever. Every morning, it is said, the peacock can be seen stretching forth his neck towards the sky and flapping his wings to greet the coming of Khasi. And the only happiness left to him is to spread his lovely feathers to catch the beams which she once more sheds upon the earth. Now I have two more stories. One is fairly short, which is this. A civet cat, Ukwi, cuts the line holding earth and heaven together. Those below were plunged into darkness because the sun hid in shame over her creepy brother's propositions. The animals were trying to find the sun. Everybody, but nobody can actually find her. Finally, the rooster saves the day by convincing the divinity who removes the curse of incestuous love to do so for the sun goddess. Then he crows 3 times and the sun goddess reappears. Super short story. Now here's another one. Everybody is out for Khasi, it seems like. So this story actually starts with a girl who ends up having to basically hide from a tiger who's trying to kill her. And that's a whole thing beforehand. But she ends up going to a mouse to help her escape from this. So the mouse, of course, tries her best to give this girl some safety. So the mouse tells the maiden to go seek refuge at the giant toad, a magician, in his cave. This toad is typically kind of creepy and he's more monstrous than you would imagine, but because the girl, Ka Nam, was incredibly terrified of this tiger, she actually decided to go seek his protection. This kind of ends up being a bit of a Thumbelina situation. Ka Nam seeks refuge. The toad ends up clothing her in a toad skin, but ends up taking this maiden into her own custody and makes her his slave. He technically saves her, though, from the tiger. So the mouse ends up finding her friend again, and she's been transformed into this gross, hideous toad, and she is incredibly sad and totally regrets sending this maiden to this terrible toad sorcerer, and knew that if she did remain in the jungle, that Ka Nam would end up being forced to live with the toads and be their slave for literally forever. So the mouse decides to secretly take her away to a magic tree and tells the maiden to climb up to that tree so that she can be transported into the sky and she would be safe from harm forever. So she does this. Ka Nam wanders homeless into the blue realm, and she's still clothed in this toad skin. Why would she not remove this toad skin? Well, the toad told her that she should not divest herself of it in the presence of others on pain of death. She took heed and wandered the blue realm in this way, and all these beautiful, luxurious creatures kind of refused to admit that this creepy-looking toad was kind of in their realm now. She finally appears at the palace of Khasi, who's the sun. She's gracious, she's kind, as you could probably tell from these previous stories. And Khasi takes pity on this girl and permits her to live in a small outhouse near the palace. So one day, the maiden actually put aside her covering of toad skin, thinking that that no one was around to see this. She was accidentally seen by the son of Khasi, who saw how breathtaking Ka-nam actually was. He fell deeply in love with her. So he decided to tell his mother about, hey, this toad-looking creature is actually a gorgeous woman in toad skin. So Khasi wanted to see this for herself. She ended up watching the maiden unnoticed and realized that, yeah, she was absolutely stunning. But the thing is, she didn't want to rush her son into an alliance with, some chick who's clearly running away from trouble. And she told her son, let's not go near or speak to the maiden until the toad skin has been destroyed and this clearly evil spell has been broken, because this girl is clearly in trouble. So Khasi takes the time when Ka-nam is asleep and stealthily seizes the toad skin and burns it to ashes. Now the maiden can appear in her own natural form and live happily ever after with Khasi's son, released from the spell of the giant toad. However, the toad learns what Khasi has done, and the toad and Khasi have apparently had previous altercations. So the toad decides to climb up to the blue realm to devour her. She bravely fought this evil sorcerer toad, and there's this battle which ensued and was witnessed by the entire universe. So when mankind saw this conflict happening, they became apprehensive. They uttered loud cries and began to beat mournfully on their drums until the world was full of sound and clamor. So because this toad is like any old bully, and he's actually a coward like all bullies are, the noise of the drums and shouting on the earth freaked him out. He became filled with fear. He thought he was going to soon be approached by an army going into battle, so he quickly releases his hold upon Khasi, and he retreats with all the speed from the blue realm. To this day, the toad continues to make periodic attacks on the sun. Most people would call them eclipses, but the ancient Khasi, who saw the great conflict, knew this to be the cannibalistic giant toad, and he is trying to devour Khasi. This is one of the most popular mythologies from the Khasi people. Khasi has a lot of really cool myths associated with her, but as far as the actual mythology from the Khasi, it's hard to pin it down because the majority of the Khasi are now, after missionaries arrived hundreds of years ago, are mostly Christian. There are still ancient practices by the Khasi, and I'm glad we have some of these tales left to share. So I hope you enjoy these tales of Khasi, the sun goddess, and the Khasi people. I'm happy I found a bunch of Khasi myths all seamlessly put together. It's almost like reading a grim fairy tale a little bit. So I was really glad to see more completed stories put together. The only disadvantage, and I will link this down in the description below, along with more information about the Khasi people and their culture, is that there aren't a lot of myths out there, and you can only find it from a few sources, so we're still fairly limited. I'd love to hear the myths from the Khasi people themselves. Most of the Khasi today are practicing Christianity ever since the early 1800s, when the British Christian monks, missionaries, came and not invaded, but they became assimilated with the Khasi people. The Khasi still practice a lot of their cultural norms, but we still see a lot of westernization there, and their culture has changed over time. It is not the same as it used to be. Again, check out the description below. There's a lot of cool stuff about the Khasi people. They still do a lot of traditional festivities, and they're really fascinating people. I loved watching additional videos about the Khasi people. I'd love to go to either Bangladesh or India and meet some of the Khasi people. Next time we're going to be traveling to Africa, to Ghana, we're going to be focusing on a goddess, or mostly the guardian of the underworld. Her name is Amokie. I hope I said that correctly, but she is a deity from the Ashanti people, who are also a part of the Akan people. There's a lot of history there, but we're going to be learning about the underworld and Amokie next time. If you enjoy my art, make sure to check out my socials at Kaiti Draws on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all of those things, and keep watching if you're enjoying mythology and art from all across the globe. Make sure to stay tuned. There's a bunch of videos listed here. Thanks again. I will see you next time.